Hello there, so here I am in Tenerife again, having to give a little pause so that the annoying beep that the microphone makes is been and gone before I start. So this is a view out of the front of the house, Mesa Motta. That's the house where Waxara spent a lot of her childhood and early adulthood, where the whole family lived together. And straight ahead there you can see a line which is Tenerife North Airport, incredibly close. And we can't see that much because of the heat haze today, so I'm going to take us for a little walk up here and just see how we get on with the wind. No idea how this is going to work. Just going to move over here, see if it makes any difference at all. Today I want to talk about my international flight over here. Lots of people haven't done this yet. I was on what I believe was the first flight from Bristol to Tenerife just a few days ago. And I want you to know just how things are these days. So there's a whole load of extra administrative bullshit that everyone has to deal with now, which serves no purpose whatsoever except to further the control agenda, obviously. And that is a Spanish Health Ministry form which needs to be filled out online. First of all, you fill in a form, and that allows you the privilege of being able to fill in the bigger form, which asks you a lot of questions, quite intrusive and of no relevance whatsoever. And when you've answered all the questions, then you get an email with a little funny square. I'm sure you're familiar, it's called the QR code. So at the moment, in order to enter Spain from another country, you have to present that when you arrive in the Tenerife airport, whether north or south. That's your crucial bit of extra admin you've got to do. If you don't do it, at this stage they're providing paper forms and you'd have to just stand there writing out the paper form instead. So it's not the end of the world if you don't get round to it. It's just another layer of things that needs to be dealt with, either before you leave online or a paper filling exercise when you arrive. So there's that. And then arriving in Bristol Airport itself, I guess the main thing I want to say about that is the first thing you do, you enter a big plastic marquee which goes on for quite a way. There's a person standing outside to point you in that direction, and in the plastic marquee you put on your mask and you have the opportunity to use a harmful chemical which is known as hand sanitizer. So you can put some harmful chemicals on your hand if you like, and you will definitely be obligated to put on the mask. Obligation rather than a request. And then that's it, you go out and you're just in the airport as per usual, except you're now wearing a mask, and if you aren't careful you've got chemicals on your hands. So I brought some plastic gloves. That's a little thing I want to add, which I notice a big difference about life before and since the fiasco that started what some people call the scandemic, is that we were all getting into the idea of not using so much plastic, and single-use plastic, yeah, really bad idea, and people were invited to go and buy cups or mugs so that they could take them to Starbucks or Costa or wherever and present their own mug. Of course none of that's allowed anymore. So it's all back to single use. Let's use as many resources as we can, and of course the whole thing about the PPE or personal protective equipment, or whatever you want to call it, a wonderful excuse to produce vast amounts of increased plastic, single use, so much of it of course. So yeah, that's all part of the picture as well, which we have just, it seems, in the blink of an eye supposed to have got used to. So in the airport, so that was the next thing. Every single place that would normally be open in the airport, this wasn't in the early hours of the morning admittedly, but everything was closed with the one exception of Starbucks. So what they've got an area of seating which is airport seating, and just a few yards after that you've got the Starbucks seating, and the Starbucks seating is at least as much as the airport seating. So there's all the little signs up, and you queue up with your social conditioning to get your drink or whatever you want. And when you've done that, you go in and sit down, but you can't sit down in any of the Starbucks seats. They're all fenced off with plastic tape, more single-use plastic being wasted. And that's it. So everyone has to cram themselves into the airport seating, and all the Starbucks official seating is left empty, because this is a really helpful way to yes. So there's a word for all this, and the word I'm leading us inexorably towards in this conversation is cognitive dissonance. There is a quite deliberate and cynical attempt being made to create cognitive dissonance in all of us, which is where it becomes increasingly obvious that what's being expected of us is absurd, has no sense behind it whatsoever, and actually is against all of the scientific understanding that is available to anyone who wishes to obtain the information. It's all out there. And as someone who qualified and did work as a microbiologist, I can verify that pretty much everything we're being told to do is either of no value or actually harmful. So this really was my big experience, being in the airplane for 3.5 hours, plus an hour and a half wait in the airport for 5 hours, wearing a mask. I should have worn it continuously. I did take it off here and there, but pretty much continuously. And so what I can say to you is as follows. Wearing a mask has a lot of implications. So in simple pragmatic terms of my physical body, what happened is I noticed I was not getting enough oxygen, and the carbon dioxide that I would normally be expelling effectively out of my lungs, I couldn't get rid of enough of it because the cloth covering over my face was actually blocking the oxygen coming in and the CO2 coming out. So that meant I entered into a state of hypoxia that created instant cognitive decline, and I just felt pretty dopey and not really with it. So on the physical sensation, and then when I actually got to probably the last half hour of the journey, I started to find I was actually needing to blow my nose, and it became like almost obsessive because there was just so much mucus or the watery trickling stuff coming out my nose, and I realized quite rapidly what was going on. I was simply discharging all the toxins that had been built up in my body from restricting the oxygen coming in and blocking the CO2 leaving as it would normally do. So I was in a state of literally toxification, and it took me almost a whole day to get over it. So obviously as soon as I got out of the airport, mask off, deep breathing, do some Qigong to encourage even more deep breathing. I did plenty of that. Still took me the best part of a day to recover from that toxified state that I was in, purely from wearing a mask. So if there's anyone out there who tells you that wearing a mask isn't going to have any effect on you physically, they're not telling you the truth. And here's the thing about me, I'm the canary. Having had the ME for so many decades and all the rest of it, it means I've got a increased sensitivity over and above what most people are aware of. So it means that I pick up on things much more quickly than most people do, which is why I call myself the canary. Canaries were sent into mines, coal mines especially, and if there were any poisonous gases which would asphyxiate and kill the miners, the thing that would happen is that the canary in the cage would die first. When the miner noticed the canary was dead, they all legged it out of the mine as fast as possible to stop themselves from being poisoned to death by the toxic gases. So I serve that function in society. So the fact that I had a really harmful experience from wearing that mask is something. But that's only the tip of the iceberg for me, because I then want to talk about some other things, particularly the emotional impact and the psychological impact. Emotionally, one of the first things I noticed, I didn't feel I could speak. I felt that if someone asked me a question, I needed to either nod my head or shake my head. And that's a bit strange. Most people seem to be able to carry on having conversations quite normally, but it didn't feel right. It felt strange to speak wearing this thing on my face. And so the next thing I notice is this sense of, oh, look at that, there's someone almost like not wearing a mask and enjoying some really good oxygenation from some wonderful aerobic exercise. Thank you, person, for doing that. That was really nice. So the emotional side is that the sense of alienation and feeling distant from everybody else. And then, of course, the thing that one notices really rapidly, a lot of people in the UK haven't had this chance to do this yet. If they've got their own vehicle, they might never have even experienced wearing a mask. That's the case for most of us in the UK. Those of us not been sort of succumbed to the blandishment of the mainstream media. So it's this sense of isolation, alienation, and then something else. It is not possible to read a person's facial features when almost the entire face is covered with a piece of material, which means that you don't have any idea what the people around you are feeling. How are they? Are they hostile? Are they feeling generous? Are they open? Are they communicative? Are they affectionate? Just what is going on, you don't know. So it puts you into a really strange position. So when I realised I didn't know what any of the people around me were thinking and feeling, there were no cues I could pick up. That caused me to feel, I'm going to use the word, I felt distressed. I felt emotional distress from that, very definitely. And I felt the effect of all this was having on my mental health as well. And I noticed, I love hypocrisy. I love to watch hypocrisy in life. So here's the thing. All the cabin staff wearing their masks. The guys who fly the plane don't wear masks. One of them came out at one point. They don't wear masks. So that was interesting to note. And then when it comes to the mask wearers themselves, there's all sorts of strategies which people develop. Like people just unconsciously realise that they can't breathe properly with this thing on. So they will develop a way whereby they've got the mask on, but their nose is sticking out. And I tried that, and it helps to an extent. I discovered I was able to get a bit more oxygen in and a bit more CO2 out. Definitely helped, but it still wasn't easy, even with my nose just uncovered, because what was tending to happen is that the air is drawn in, of course, from below the nose, which means the vicinity of the mask. So it still doesn't really help, doesn't really do the job. So definitely feeling of social isolation and emotional alienation and feeling disconnect, that's the word. This sense of emotional disconnect from everyone else, that they didn't seem like human beings anymore. In fact, they seemed like beings that you might encounter in a rather, say, R-rated, 18-rated sci-fi movie. You know the kind. In fact, isn't it funny we've had so many films about zombies in the last 5 years? Well, for people in the UK who are not exposed to a lot of mask wearing yet, that's what it's going to feel like. It's going to feel like zombie time, everybody, because that's the emotional impact I find of being around a load of people wearing masks. They just feel less than human, and it's not a logical thing. It's not a rational thing. This is a very emotional reaction. So I noticed also that the English people, when they got out of the airport, the first thing they did, as soon as they crossed the threshold, they ripped the mask off. And I noticed Spanish people coming and going through the same exit. They weren't doing that because they've had a lot more of this mask conditioning. And that's what I've experienced since I've been here. Masks, masks, masks. But not always. It was interesting to note that not everyone wears them. The only time that everyone wears them, I've noticed so far, is every time you go into a supermarket. You've got 100% mask wearing. So then let's look at another aspect of all this, which to me is very important. If you've got hypoxia, if you've got toxification of the body through too much CO2 and not enough oxygen, this obviously weakens the immune system. So the very thing people are being mandated to wear to protect them is actually the source of their threat. And be under no illusions about this, please. A weakened immune system means you're much more likely to contract diseases, not just the virus in question, but diseases in general. That's what a weakened immune system means. So be aware that if you wear a mask and someone tells you it won't make any difference, it's fine, it won't do any harm, that person doesn't know the facts, and the facts are that that's what it is. A mask actually makes your immune system weaker. You're more likely to get diseases. Well, that's the one thing we all want to avoid at this time, isn't it? And I am aware, certainly in the UK, that it's becoming obvious that there are certain exemptions. People in certain situations don't have to wear masks, and I feel that's going to be a film for the near future, but not today. So, being in a country where when I'm walking down the street, I would say 2 people out of 10 don't have a mask, 8 people out of 10 do, it feels creepy, it feels chilling, and it feels like emotionally disconnecting. And then being in the supermarket, with all I wanted to do as soon as I got in the supermarket last night was to get what I wanted and get the hell out of there. And I was almost running by the time I got to the exit. It was that bad. Rip the mask off, take a deep breath, even though the air wasn't that pure at that particular point, because of course it's not just the physical and emotional, it's a psychological impact as well, all this is having too. Psychological impact of wearing something that is actually violating my free will. This is the final thing I want to point out. We are living in a time now where a violation of the free will of the citizens of a country is becoming commonplace, and it is becoming the norm, and it is becoming what people are going to have to choose to either comply or not. And it's going to be a matter of how each individual chooses to respond to this. Of course, there's massive social pressures and social conditioning as soon as everyone around you is doing this very thing that you know is actually harmful to yourself and to them. That's a real issue. That's something to take on, isn't it? So it feels to me like I've gone through my life and 2020 has arrived, and I suddenly find myself in a situation where I'm being exposed to far more coercion, attempts to control me, curtail my freedom, to restrict my free choices, and actually attempts are being made to force me to become sicker, to become less healthy. Because if I comply with all the recommendations, that is an inevitability. There isn't any question about that, unfortunately. And there's a little interesting aside, at the same time as all this is going on, and the only word I can use is insanity, just look what's happening in the operating theatres and hospitals. It has become increasingly clear that staff who work in operating theatres, surgeons and their assistants, suffer from wearing the masks, and so they're experimenting with active air systems now, whereby filtered air is blown onto the patient and directed away from the patient on the operating table, and this means that the theatre staff no longer need to wear masks in these situations. So there's lots of research being done about this, and I don't know the latest, but I do know that this is something that's up and coming. So we could be living in a world very soon whereby you have an operation and the staff are not wearing masks because they know how harmful it is, and then you go out to the hospital having got yourself sorted out, your operation, you're cured, and then you're being told to wear a mask. Ultimate absurdity. So yeah, these are the times that we're living in. Whoever thought it? Well, actually some of us were aware that this was on the horizon for some time, some years actually, but sometimes even knowing something in advance doesn't make the reality any easier to deal with. So I wish you all the best. I advise you to do your own research. I advise you to trust no one and find out for yourself. And I am including a little link with this film, and it's a very reputable source, someone who's devoted their life to doing research scientifically, particularly to do with all areas of health. So if you want to check that out, you're most welcome to do so. But that's my ultimate advice to you. Do your own research, trust no one, make your own conclusions, and then take whatever action you deem to be appropriate for you. Respect to yourself. All the love. Cheers for now.